In 1941 Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. This single event, although horrendous, began a weapons research program for the US. It was called the Manhattan Project. One project within the Manhattan Project was called Trinity. It was directed by theoretical physicist Robert Oppenheimer. He was dedicated to weaponizing nuclear fission as quickly as possible. Oppenheimer was successful, because on July 16, 1945, his team detonated a test plutonium bomb at the White Sands Proving Grounds. One witness said, "The lighting effects beggared description. The whole country was lighted by a searing light with the intensity many times that of the midday sun. It was golden, purple, violet, gray, and blue. It lit every peak, crevasse, and ridge of the nearby mountain range with a clarity and beauty that cannot be described but must be seen to be imagined." The explosion created a crater 300 feet wide and 5 foot deep. Inside it was a green, glassy material that proved temperatures had risen above 3090 degrees Fahrenheit. This is scientifically the minimum temperature needed to melt sand into glass. They called this radioactive glass trinitite, and it was considered a unique material found nowhere else on Earth. When Oppenheimer was questioned if Trinity was the first ever detonation of an atomic device, he answered, "Yes, in modern times." Oppenheimer's words beg the question. And before modern times? Could Oppenheimer suspect a prehistoric nuclear war? If he did, he had a good reason. Oppenheimer began to study Sanskrit because he wanted to read them in their original language. He was a professor before the war and was known to quote passages from the Mahabharata in class lectures. One of the sections in the Bhagavad Gita, called the Book of Drona, narrates magical weapons, called astra, that could destroy entire armies, causing crowds of warriors with steeds and elephants and weapons to be carried away as if they were dry leaves of trees. Another weapon produced vertical, billowing smoke clouds that opened up like a giant umbrella. This would be suggestive of the massive rising mushroom cloud created by the Trinity test. The Brahmastra was the most destructive of the Astra weapons. It's said to have been created by the god Brahma. It was said to be a single projectile charged with all the power in the universe. It was a huge messenger of death that reduced to ashes a complete race. There was nothing that could stop it. The weapon created an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns that rose in all its splendor. After, corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out, pottery broke without any apparent cause, and the birds turned white. After a few hours, all foodstuffs were infected. Any target hit by the Brahmastra would be utterly destroyed, land would become barren and lifeless, rainfall would cease, and infertility in humans and animals would follow for eons of time. The Brahmastra was detonated at the end of the final 18-day Battle of Kurukshetra. The Pandavas vanquished their enemy, the Kauravas, with the devastating weapon, but the few surviving Pandavas discovered that there was nothing left to occupy. With no one left to rule, the Brahmastra had destroyed the entire Kauravas society and turned the region into a wilderness. The war also marked, in the Vedic system, the beginning of the current Kali Yuga age. Declassified eyewitness accounts of the Trinity nuclear test echo the ancient descriptions of the Brahmastra. L.W. Alvarez was sitting between the pilot and co-pilot of a B-29 flying roughly 25 miles from the blast site. He said, "Intense light covered my field of vision. After which I noted an orange-red glow. The cloud started to push up, appearing as a parachute being blown up by a large electric fan. 10 miles from the blast," witness Enrico Fermi accounted, "I had the impression that suddenly the countryside became brighter than full daylight. Technician Kenneth Greason, also 10 miles from the site, saw a brilliant yellow-white light all around. A tremendous cloud of smoke was pouring upwards, some parts having brilliant red and yellow colors, like clouds at sunset. Philip Morrison said that what I saw first was a brilliant violet glow. Immediately after this brilliant violet flash, I observed an enormous, brilliant disk of white light, a color much whiter, and several times brighter than the noon sun. A more direct comparison to the Brahmastra destruction is the aftermath of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The core destruction radius was about a mile around ground zero. Fires were reported across an additional 4.4 square miles. Humans and animals in the blast zone turned to carbon, echoing the words of the Mahabharata, corpses so burned as to be unrecognizable. Others were killed by flying projectiles and fires. Just a few days later, the Nagasaki bombing produced the same death and devastation. When the Trinity team discovered the green glass in the bomb craters, they named the material trinitite. The glass, also called nuclear, atomic, and desert glass, was formed when silica sand was heated to temperatures above 3090 degrees by the blast. After the Trinity test, engineer Albion Hart noticed that the trinitite was identical to the material he had seen in the African desert decades earlier. He calculated that the size of the African glass deposit indicated a blast 10,000 times more powerful than the Trinity bomb. The similarities were dismissed, as no one believed an ancient or modern blast of those proportions were possible. The glass has also been found under Neolithic, Sumerian, and Babylonian layers at archaeological sites in Iraq. Is it possible that an ancient civilization prior to the Neolithic period blew itself back to the Stone Age with nuclear devices? Libyan desert glass deposits, estimated to be 28.5 million years old, stretch over 6,500 square kilometers into neighboring Egypt. The light green Libyan glass, called the Rock of God, was so gem-like and crystal clear it was used in royal Egyptian jewelry. 10,000-year-old Paleolithic tools made from desert glass have been found in Egypt and throughout North Africa. Mainstream science asserts that desert glass, other than white sands, is the product of ancient meteor and lightning strikes, but others have debunked these theories. In what is now Pakistan, the ruins of two ancient cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, were discovered in the 1920s. The two sites were dated to around 2500 BCE. Archaeological excavation began, and when the dig reached the original street level, 44 skeletons were found sprawled in the ancient roadways. A researcher reported at least one of the skeletons contained 50 times the level of radiation it should have had. While officials and mainstream scientists continue to find alternative explanations for anomalies like the desert glass, as well as radioactive skeletons, ancient nuclear dust, and ash. The simplest explanation is this. At some point in our distant human history, radioactive devices were detonated. As a scientist, Oppenheimer would have been familiar with the Occam's razor principle. Which is, if two explanations account for all the facts, the simpler one is more likely to be correct. And if there are multiple explanations for a mystery, the simplest solution is likely to be the closest to the truth. Do you think Oppenheimer in his early studies of the Brahmastra weapon and the Bhagavad Gita text made a rediscovery? I don't much think he was completely in agreement with his find.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him